You don't have to watch a lot of my videos to know I'm quite fond of revolvers. And because of that, a lot of people ask me, how do I go about buying a used revolver? It seems a lot of people that wouldn't think twice about buying a used semi-auto feel a little bit out of their element when they're looking at used revolvers. So I thought I would do a quick video here that just shows you a few things to look for when you're buying a used revolver. It's not going to be the quintessential guide to finding the perfect revolver, just going to be a few simple things that pretty much anybody can look at and can tell that it's the way it should be when they're picking out a revolver and want to make sure it's going to be, reasonably in good shape. Now, the first thing you do is pretty simple. You just look it over for damage. Look for places that are obviously marred or scratched or dinged or just don't look like they've been well taken care of. Look at the seams, like the seams here, the seams on the side plate. Make sure they don't look like they've been pried off. If they've been pried off, that means someone's probably been monkeying around with the interior. And if they damaged the parts taking them off, they probably shouldn't have been inside there. Another good thing to look at is the screws. Make sure the screw heads look like they match. Make sure they're not marred up and damaged. If they're marred up and damaged, once again, that's a sign that someone's been inside the gun that probably shouldn't have been inside the gun. Now, another thing you can look for is how clean the gun is. Now, a clean gun isn't necessarily a good gun, but a dirty gun is sometimes an indication that the previous owner didn't care for it the way they should have. So a dirty gun should give you a little bit of a red flag that you need to look for other things. Another thing to look for on the exterior of the gun is your barrel alignment. Now, this isn't as big a problem in older guns, especially not ones that have pinned barrels, but in newer guns, that seems to be a problem sometimes. It's mostly a cosmetic issue, but for me, it's not acceptable. If I'm buying a gun, I want the barrel to be tilted perfectly with the frame. Now, like I say, it's not a big issue as far as performance goes because the guns are still aligned properly. They're just a little bit off tilt-wise. But like I said, I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think it's acceptable on a gun, so I always look for barrel alignment. And one of the last things to look for on the outside of the gun before you start looking too deeply into it is make sure the crown is not damaged. You don't want a damaged crown on the outside here. Just look at that, make sure it's even, consistent. Now, you will see your rifling on the crown. Some people will mistake that for damage, but it's not. Just make sure the outside of the crown is in good shape. Now, this next part is pretty simple. Pull the trigger. Just make sure it feels like it's working properly, like it has a nice solid pull, a nice solid fall of the hammer. That's very important that functions. Make sure the cylinder is rotating and then locking into place before the hammer actually falls. That's your basic performance of a revolver, so you want that happening. Now, if it isn't pulling properly, if it feels like it's not quite right or probably too light, well, take the grips off and look at the mainspring. If the gun shop owner or the person who's selling you the gun doesn't want you to do that, well, then don't buy the gun because that means they're probably hiding something. But just take that off, take a look at the mainspring, make sure the adjustment screws are right. They're up here if they're a Taurus, they're right here in the front if they're a Smith & Wesson. They're different in different guns, but you can usually tell pretty quickly by looking at the mainspring if it's properly put in place or not. So take a look at the mainspring housing if this feels like it's too light or not functioning properly. But if it's functioning properly, then the mainspring housing is probably okay too. You're also going to want to make sure the cylinder locks up. Now, there can be a little give, a little clicking when it's not cocked like this, but it still shouldn't rotate freely in any direction. It should be locked in place. Then when you lock the hammer back, it should lock even tighter. There should be almost no movement, if any movement at all now. It should be locked in place. One more thing about lockup, make sure you check it on every cylinder. Pull it back and check it on every cylinder. Don't assume it's good on all of them. If it's good on one of them, check them all. And check your little cylinder stops here, make sure that they are clean and that they show no signs of damage. Another thing you want to check right off the bat is the firing pin. Now, if it's on the hammer like this one, you just cock it back, inspect it, make sure it looks like it's in good shape. But if it's not on the firing pin, you're going to need to make sure it's coming out properly inside the gun. Now, this is an older gun, and it's made real tight here, so it's hard to see. So I'm going to use a newer gun to show you how to check a firing pin if it's not on the hammer. Now, I'm hoping you're going to be able to see this here, but if you look towards the top there, right by the recoil shield, between the cylinder and the recoil shield, you should see the firing pin come out when I pull the trigger. See it right there? You can see it poking its little head out. And then when you release the trigger, it should disappear. This would also be a good time to check fitment of the crane. Now, the crane is the part right here that the cylinder rides on when it swings out. Just make sure that's fitted properly. Make sure the gap here is proper. Make sure this gap right here is nice and even and consistent. If this isn't even and this isn't even, this little gap here in the front, that's a good indication that this crane has been bent. And a lot of people like to slam the cylinders closed. That can bend the crane. That's a bad sign. Next, you're going to want to open the gun up and start looking inside of it, so you want to check the cylinder release. The cylinder release should have a little bit of tension on it. It should be pretty stiff to push, but when it is pushed all the way, the cylinder should come loose freely. It shouldn't be difficult to get it out, shouldn't feel like anything's catching. So if that's working properly, once you push that all the way in, that'll come out easy. Next, once you have your cylinder open, just look and see if your clockwork here looks good, if it doesn't look damaged, you don't see anything that's obviously gouged or broken. And check your ejector rod. Make sure it works, make sure the star comes up properly, and make sure it springs back when you let go of it. And you're going to want to check your cylinders here too. Just look through them, make sure that they look clean, they look undamaged, they don't look gouged or, worn, anything like that. They should just be a nice smooth bore throughout there. And you can also take time to make sure there's no cracks in the cylinder. Now, it's very rare you're going to find a cracked cylinder because if they go, they go. But, it doesn't hurt to check for them. The next thing you want to check is the forcing cone. That's the little part that looks like it's a piece of the barrel coming out that lines up with the cylinder. So you want to check and make sure that is undamaged. You're also going to make sure that forcing cone comes pretty much up to the cylinder when the cylinder is closed. There should be almost no gap. If there is a sizable gap, that's an indication that someone may have damaged that forcing cone and then filed it back down flat to hide the damage. If that is on a gun, don't buy the gun. It's not worth taking the risk. That's a no-go. Another good place to check for damage is your recoil shield here on the cylinder side, because a lot of people like to slam these cylinders closed and bullets bounce in and out as they're doing it if they're abusing their gun, and they'll often catch on this and make a big ding in it. So check for dings on your recoil shield. Another little thing you can check is your cylinder stop here. It should press easily and should pop right back up when you let go of it. But, you already checked your cylinder lockup. And if that was working properly, this is probably working properly too. But never hurts to check again. Now the next thing you want to check is the rifling. Just look down the barrel. Make sure that rifling still looks consistent and even. Make sure there's no signs of like squib loads getting stuck in there and getting pounded out, or barrel damage or any bulging, etc. Just make sure that looks good, looks consistent, looks clean, and then your barrel is probably in pretty good shape. So that's pretty much it. You just look for those simple things on a revolver and you can feel pretty confident that you're getting a good gun. Just look for those signs of abuse and avoid guns that are overly abused. Also, keep in mind, minor cosmetic damages really aren't going to affect function all that much. And sometimes they can get you a bargain. I got a good price on this gun simply because it has a scuff right here. So sometimes cosmetic damage isn't a deal killer. It can actually make the deal a little bit sweeter for you. So there you have it. There's my basic little beginner's guide to buying a used revolver for the everyday man. Now, one thing I will add, know what you're looking at when you go look at a gun. Know what it's worth. Do a little research. That way, if you know what it's worth, and then you can look and see if it's in good condition, you can make buying your first revolver a good experience and not get taken to the cleaners. You ain't even my real dad.